right, so today's tutorial, today's lesson is going to be all about core data, uh, gestures, and user defaults. So mostly memory. I'm actually working in some gesture events in here as well. So let's get into this. Let's start to build out our application. But before we do, let's see what the final product would look like. So I've got here my core data tutorial. I've got a name, email, and food. Now, this is actually previously entered information that we're going to retrieve and through user defaults. Now, if I click here to see data, we go to here and we see what we see here is a list view of data from core data. So saved into our core data database, right? If I swipe one of them left, well, if I click on it, first of all, you see like an alert box pop up. If I swipe, it deletes. All right. And if I hit back and I go to click here to add new data, all right, I have here a form. Click on the form. Let's add another character from one of my games. So Walla, and we'll say Walla at projectmkd.com. We'll say his favorite food. Well, what do bears like? I guess koala bears. Let's say berries. We'll hit submit. All right, now let's hit back. And what we'll do for core data is we'll have to stop and start to verify that this actually is refreshing. Or sorry, for user defaults, that is. So now you can see Walla projectmt.com, berries. So we didn't trigger a refresh or a repaint on this screen because it happened on another screen. So, but in the end, it did save it to core data. All right, so let's get into building this thing. All right, so we have here our fresh project. We're going to do iOS single view application. Hit next. And product name, we'll call it M5. We'll call it core data. All right. And the important thing to note here is that for now, we're actually going to check off use core data. What this does is it actually preloads a lot of the core data stuff for us. I mean, you could do it manually, but we're going to skip ahead with all the extras that we need to do to get core data integrated into our application here and just check off this checkbox. It'll do all, Apple will set up in Xcode all of the stuff we need automatically. And we'll talk about that stuff soon. Of course, don't forget we're using SwiftUI here, so make sure that SwiftUI is set. All right, and let's hit next and give it a home. All right, so the first thing we're going to notice is that it auto-generated a file called m5coredata.xcdatamodelD. Now, the thing about core data is that it interacts with a built-in SQLite database. So it actually has iOS has SQLite already built into it, just like Android does. And you could write C code yourself to interact with the libraries directly and get core data up and running yourself, or sorry, get SQLite up and running yourself. But core data has shortcutted all of that for us. And Apple's created a very simple user interface here that allows us to interact and be able to build out a UI accordingly. A database accordingly, easily, with ease. So the first thing we're going to do is we have here entities. All right, and with entities, we're going to add a new one. So by clicking on add entity, we can add a new one. And it auto-generated one. I actually accidentally double-clicked here and generated a second one, so I'm going to delete this second one. And so we have here, by default, the name for entity is entity. You can actually rename it just by clicking on it. And we're going to actually rename it from entity to entries. All right. And for our attributes, you can see the three options here: attributes, relationships, and fetch properties. So attributes is really what we're going to focus on today. We're going to have our quote unquote columns for our database table. And you got relationships, so relationships between tables, or in this case, we only have one table, so it doesn't really matter, or one entity. And then fetch properties would be for retrieving or for calculating based on with this table or multiple tables or entities, between columns, try to make a calculation or calculate something between multiple columns. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with attributes, and we're going to click on the plus sign, and I'm going to start with ID. All right. Now, all the first characters for attributes must always be lowercase. So you notice I'm using ID in lowercase. And the type for ID is going to be UUID because I want it to auto-generate a unique number for me. All right. If I hit plus sign again, we'll say name, and name will be a string. I'll hit plus again. Email. Email will be a string as well. And food. Food will be a string as well. All right, so I'm going to keep it simple for this exercise. Name, email, and food will all be strings. And that's it for our entity. And if I click somewhere, just do a Command S to save, just in case I needed to. But basically, we have our entity right here, and we're ready to go. All right. Now the thing is that you're probably wondering, well, what about classes? Like, do I now need to create like a unique class or something to interact with this model? I don't have to, because now that I've created this here, Apple in Xcode has already auto generated the classes for me to use, and you're going to see that in a moment. So now that I have my model, let's build out our app. And to do that, we're going to have a home page with two subpages, or a home view with two subviews. So we already have content view.swift, all right, and we have scene delegate and app delegate. I'm just gonna right click and create a new group, or essentially a new folder. I'm gonna call it views. I'll just drag content view over to views, and I'm gonna right click on views and say new file. It'll be iOS SwiftUI view, and this first subview will be called list entries view. So this will be for our list. All right, and then I'm going to right click on views again and say new file, and again SwiftUI view, and this will be add entries view. All right. And so what we may want to do now is, before even starting into our views, explore a bit about core data and what's been done and auto-generated, because our next step would be, after we set up the home page, the content view page, would be to be able to retrieve data. And so we should really populate some data into this database. So we've got our views, we're almost ready to go. We'll create our navigation links in a moment, but we'll start inside appdelegate.swift. And if you recall from a previous discussion, appdelegate is like the manager class for the entire app. So it handles minimizing, maximizing, and then most importantly, did finish launching, where we can actually auto execute code upon loading the app, such as connecting to a database or whatnot. But in this case, in our case here, it's already been done. Right? All of our database stuff has already been done. But let's look at what's been done in this file already. So we have here did finish launching. We have here some setup configuration for connecting scene session. This is for connecting our scene and getting it set up. And then there's did discard scene session. So you can actually read through and see what these methods are all about. There's this one. This is specifically for core data. So we're saying persistent container, which extends NS persistent container. And you can see here that it's actually requesting access to M5 core data .xc data model D, right? So it's actually specifying here what the model file is. So if you want to change the model file or create a new model file, you would actually just come here and change this line, or add a second container call, right? If you want to have both of them at the same time, right? And so here the idea is that it's all comments, but the idea is that you would do your error handling here. For our time's sake, we're not going to get into it, but you could pop up some alert boxes and say, hey, this isn't right, or do some print statements and so on. All right. Now, they generated a method called save context. And the purpose of save context is to help with saving or flushing your data to the database. So you're going to make changes to your database, but you have to flush it to the database. It has to actually be pushed because you'll have a copy in memory for your changes, but you'll need to be able to send it over to the real deal. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add to this. We're not going to add to it. We're going to add a method right below it. All right. And we're going to call this save entry. So I'll say func save entry. And we'll pass in n for name, which is of type string, e for email, which is of type string, and f for food, which is of type string. All right. Now, what I need to do is I need to get access, I need to instantiate a new entries object based on what's inside the database itself, the persistent container that we just saw above. So I'm going to say let new entry equal entries. Like I said before, entries is auto-generated because we renamed that entity inside the XC data model D file. And I'll have to open up some round brackets here, and I actually need the context. So I need this one, and this one is actually persistent container dot view context. All right, and that is our link into the database and returning back an object of type entries. So with name, email, food, and ID. Now all I do is just flush the information in. So I'll just say new entry dot ID. Now I actually have to do this myself. If I don't do this, it'll probably cause a crash. Is equal to UUID instantiated. All right, and then new entry dot name is equal to n. Be careful of the autocompletes. New entry dot email is equal to e, and new entry dot food is equal to f. All right, so their name, email, and food have been saved. And if I do this, it won't be enough. I need to call save context, the method just above us, because the method just above us will actually flush it into the real database. So now I've got my save entry method, and now I can actually use it for any time I want to insert some data. Well, right now our database is empty. We've created the database. We've created a table or an entity called entries. We've got name, email, food, and ID in there. And if we try and create our list to read from this database, it'll read nothing, which won't necessarily which will introduce a lot of question marks for us, because is our list broken? Is our database broken? Or is everything perfectly fine? Right? We won't know. It'd be too much guessing. So I think the best bet is to actually feed in some fake data. Right? And the easiest way to do that, since we created this method called save entry, let's go into did finish launching, which will auto execute the app and auto execute some code, whatever we want. So it'll auto execute entering some lines of data. So I'll scroll up to did finish launching. All right. And I'm going to add these 2 lines of code just for 2 rows of data. But after I run it the first time, I need to comment out these lines of code the next time. So I'm going to say save entry, and let's make up some data. So I'm going to say monkey, and monkey will be monkey at projectmkd.com. And we'll say his favorite food is bananas. We'll say save entry, and we'll say donkey, and then donkey at projectmkd.com. We'll say donkey likes grass. Okay, and that's good enough. All right, now if I run it, let's verify everything is fine, it doesn't crash. And we get a hello world, it's perfectly fine, no crashes, so that's good. Now I'm going to stop this thing. And I'm going to comment out these 2 lines of code, because what will happen is if I run it a second time, it'll just keep reinserting these 2 lines. We'll just keep getting these 2 lines over and over and over and over again. So we don't want that. So I'm commenting out these lines of code. And now I can go ahead and start building out my page navigation. Now I'm under the assumption that I have data in the database, and I could just run like a simple for each loop just to pull all the data out and just read from it. But let's let the list do all of that for us. So now let's switch over to content view.swift, and let's start building out that home page. So what we'll need to do in our body is put this hello world inside a VStack, actually also inside a navigation view, because we're navigating to new pages. So navigation view. All right. And put a VStack inside of it. All right. Now let's move hello world into it. All right. So we have here our navigation view, our VStack, and now let's change hello world to my core data tutorial. And let's spread things out. Give it like 50 padding. All right. So dot padding of 50. All right. Now let's add a couple of navigation links to get to our buttons. So go navigate to and from. So we'll say navigation link. And destination will be, so the first page will be to our list entries view page. All right. And the text will be click here to see data. Add some padding for this as well. All right, and a second navigation link. And this one will go to add entries view instantiated. And we'll say text, click here to add new data. Padding is 50 as well. All right, so we have basically our home page up and running. We could run this thing just to verify everything's okay. And we should see 2 pages with hello world on each of them. So we see here our my core data tutorial. Click here to see data, click here to add new data. So click on that, we got hello world, good. All right, hit back. We'll click on this one, hello world again, good. So we'll go back and forth between the 2 pages. All right. So now that we have our home page set up for now, we saw that there was more to the home page. We'll get back to the other data in a moment. But for now, let's move into our list page and learn how to retrieve data from core data into a list. So now let's move into list entries view.swift. All right, we have here a hello world, which we will, we'll dump it, but we'll repurpose it in a moment. Let's start by declaring some variables. All right, but first thing first, this is our list. And what we need to do is we need to create a custom row object. So in our last tutorial, we learned about lists and we learned how to create a custom cell. And that requires us to create a separate struct for the custom cell. We're going to leave this list entries view to be our object for displaying the list. And now we're going to create a separate one for our custom cell for each row in the list. So we'll say struct entries row extends view. All right. And we'll say var person entries. All right. So we'll be declaring a variable called person to represent our entries. Now we're going to need an environment variable. We talked about environment variables before. Basically, it allows us access into our into the system environment to grab certain variables. So in this case, we need manage object context. All right, which actually is the manager for our core data system. So it allows us to access the database in that way. So we're going to say at environment. All right, managed object context. All right, we'll say var context. Okay, so that'll give us access into it. Now it's complaining because we're missing a body. Let me see if autocomplete will let me just put it in instead of typing it out. No, sometimes autocomplete is not your best friend. So I'm just going to say var body extends some view to make it happy. All right, now inside of it, and it's still mad because it's empty. So let's get into populating the list cell itself. We're going to have two labels, one above the other. So we'll need a VStack. All right, and so we'll start off with our first piece of text. We'll say text, and the text will represent will be the name. So we'll say person.name. And we'll add a double question mark to say, hey, if person.name is null, let's say no name given. Okay, let's give it a frame and make it so that we can make it left justified. So it looks a bit better there. So we'll say frame width will be 300, height will be 30 pixels high, and most importantly, alignment will be dot leading. Okay, so it'll be left justified. All right, see the errors have gone away. Now let's do one more text. This one will be person.email. Otherwise, double question mark, no email given. And dot frame, same idea. Width is 300, height is 30, alignment is dot leading as well. All right, and so now we have name and email. This is enough for us to work with. Now let's move over to the actual list entries view screen, where we're going to need to make a request to core data and then push it into our list. All right, we're using this list entries row or entries row object to be the design of each cell. Okay, so I'll leave that there. I'll try and keep both in as much as I can. But starting with list entries view, first we also need access to that managed object context as well. So I'm going to say at environment, all right, slash dot managed object context, and then var context. So we'll call it context. Now we need to do a fetch request. A fetch request will make a request of core data to request the data and bring it back. So I'm going to say at fetch request, open a set of round brackets. I'm going to use multiple lines so it's readable, but that's basically it. So I'm going to make it on separate lines so it's easier to read. So bear with me for a moment. All right, so first we'll start with entity. Entity will be entries.entity. All right, that'll make a request to our core data called entries, our entity called entries that we made earlier. All right, now I'll put sort descriptors on a new line. And sort descriptors like ascending, descending, but essentially we're going to use an object called, and in square brackets, NSSort descriptor. All right, and open a round bracket. We're looking for key path. All right, and ascending. So what is going to be, so what is sort descriptor? It's an object that will help us. It's a helper object that will allow us to sort based on name. In this case, or actually we're going to say based on name, but based on a column, particular column we choose. So for key path, I'm going to say slash entries with capital E dot name, and ascending true. So from A to Z. All right. Now, and we have our closing square. Everything lines up. It's not happy because we still have a little bit more to go. All right. There's our closing round bracket. So now we have to push this into an object. So we'll say var people extends fetched results of entries. Okay, there you go. So this is now making a request of our core data database, in particular to our entries entity, for all the data that's in there, return it back as people. Okay, now we can apply this to a list. So now we can go into body and create a list. All right, so I'm actually going to remove hello world. All right, and I'm going to say list. And passing into list, I'm going to pass people. But I need a little bit more. I'm going to say comma ID is /.self. So basically look within self for the array called people. Now I'm going to open up some curlies to define my list. And this is a for each type loop. So each index will be represented as P in to say begin our code. And now we'll just say entries row, which we just created above, passing in person P. Okay, and let's add a nav bar title. So navigation bar title, we'll say food for MKD2, or whatever you want to call it. All right. All right. So what's happening here is that we're doing a for each loop. We talked about this last time, but we'll rehash it again here. We're creating a list, and inside the list will be based on our people array, which was defined up here based on our fetch request. Because we said ID is /self, it's saying look within self, so it knows to look up here for people. Now each loop or each index in this loop will represent one index of people, all right, as the letter P. All right, in meaning begin, go ahead and specify our entries row, passing in person P. We have our navigation bar title for this. All right, so let's give this a run and let's verify that we have our data. So I hit play. We got our home page, so my core data tutorial. Click here to see data, so I'll click on that. And you can see here, we have here donkey and monkey, right? So we have our data for our first two items in the database. All right, so what we can do now is we can actually add the ability to click on the cell, have an alert box pop up, and show show the person's favorite food. So let's do that. All right, now if you recall from our earlier exercise on the calculator app, how we added an alert box for for protecting against a divide by zero, we're going to take the exact same approach here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll up to entries row. All right, and add a state var. So we'll say state private var, call it showing alert is equal to false. All right, now we're going to get into gestures in a bit, but we'll start by we'll start with the simple tap gesture. Now last time around I showed you can add a navigation link into each row. We're not going to do that because we're not going to navigate to a new page, but instead we'll use a tap gesture to represent one of the cells to be able to click on it and be able to have some action happen. So first off, we have here our VStack. We're going to continue on with the VStack by using a .alert, right? Is presented will be based on, I'm going to get rid of this extra context. So first off, is presented will be represented by $showing alert. And I don't need the extra context here. Which I could use it to put my code in, but instead of doing context, I'll just put the curlies here. It's the same thing. So now I'm going to instantiate an alert. Open a round bracket. What do we want? We want title, message, dismiss button. All right, so title will be a text representing name and then /person.name. All right, message will be another text, which would be represented as food or favorite food, which is represented as person.food. Dismiss button, we'll use it as .default, and the label will be a text representing got it as text. All right, it's going to complain, and we'll make it happy by adding exclamation marks, but let's just see here. We'll just walk through, sometimes sometimes Xcode's ability to help is actually genuine. So I'm going to go with the second fix there, add an exclamation mark saying we'll always have some data there. All right. And so that's our alert box, but we're almost there because we have to actually specify how we're going to get this to happen. Oh, also for the alert box, we need to add some curly brackets as a completion handler to say self.showingAlert equals false, because we're going to set it to true. We got to set it to false at some point so it doesn't keep doing so. Oh, right. It actually goes inside the closing round brackets. I got to move that there. Yeah, there we go. So there's our little completion handler for the .default dismiss button to make showing alert false. Now, we'll talk about gestures more later, but for now, let's just add a very simple tap gesture. To add any sort of gesture, we just continue on with our VStack, and we'll say .onTap gesture, and inside of it we'll say self.showingAlert equals true. All right, we'll talk more about gestures in a moment because I want to add the ability to add a new item to the database first before I show you how to delete and to run out of items to delete. I don't want to do that just yet, so we're going to do add first. But for now, we have our alert button ready to go. All right, we have an on tap gesture to tell us to turn on the alert. And then we have a completion handler for our .default button to say alert is false. So let's give it a run. So let's see, click here to see data, click on donkey, and there we go. Name donkey, favorite food, grass, got it. All right. So we have the ability to click on a cell and have something happen. We could go more with this. We could actually add in animations. We talked about animations in a previous video. So what you could do now is expand on this and have animations happen. But because of time, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you the basics. And then from here on in, you practice and grow, add some animations, make something happen. Because I just clicked on it and the alert box appeared. But we're so accustomed to animations like a fade in out or something happening just to indicate, hey, we clicked on this. So that's what's missing here. So I invite you to actually expand on this example and add in some animation. All right. So now that we have the ability to list out our items, now the next step is to add a new item. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to add entries view.swift. All right. And inside of add entries view.swift, we'll start by defining a form. And inside the form, we'll have 3 text fields and a submit button. But our text fields are going to require 3 state variables. So really, before even defining the form, we're going to define the state variables. So we're going to say at state var name is a string, set it equal to empty. At state var email is a string, set it equal to empty as well. And at state var food is a string equals empty as well. All right. Now you can go ahead and define a form. We're going to put that form inside of VStack. Okay, I'm actually going to remove the text label and say VStack. We'll put a form in. All right. Now our first section will be we'll divide this into sections. We'll have sections for our text fields and a section for our submit button. So we'll say section. We'll just use header. All right, and I'm gonna and for header we'll say text new user. All right, and context, instead of this, I'm gonna do what I did before, have curlies. All right, and we'll have 3 text fields. So text field, name, and comma text will be $name, and then text field again, email, text will be $email, text field, food, represented as text $food. All right, that'll be my first section. All right, notice the errors went away. My second section will just be the submit button. All right, so I'll say section, header will be text, and we'll say submit. All right, and inside of this we'll say button, submit. And within that submit, we'll have a completion handler for upon clicking on the button. We'll even do a print, just say submitting. Right, just so we know that something's going on there. Now we need to actually add some functionality so that we can actually add this to our database. Okay, so what we can do is, and it's not very difficult to do, but before we do that, let's add in our navigation bar title, which will go here. So dot navigation bar title, we'll say add new data. All right, now let's add a new method. We'll put it right there. We'll call it func add new person. All right, now we created a method called save entry a while ago. That was inside our app delegate. Now our app delegate is a singleton class, and like I said earlier, it's a manager object for managing all the app's functionality, the life cycle of it. And because it's a singleton class, we can instantiate it once and only once. That's what singletons mean, that you're only allowed to instantiate it once. You can't instantiate a second time. The reason for this is a neat little programming technique where because it's only instantiated once, whatever data is inside that object is current. So if you have any variables inside of it, it's almost like a mini database in itself, because it's like one central repository for that object. We're going to, instead of instantiating app delegate, we're going to request access to app delegate. And the way you request access to app delegate is to say let main delegate equal UI application dot shared dot delegate as app delegate. All right, so it casts it as an app delegate. Now let's use it. Now all I have to do is just say main delegate dot save entry, same save entry we did earlier, and just pass in name, email, and food. That's it. Under print submitting, we need to call add new person. Probably want to say self dot add new person. Let's let Xcode do that for me, and let's run. So click here to add new data. We'll say EOT at projectmkd.com. Fair food raw meat, and hit submit. So there's submitting there. Let's hit back, click here to see new data, and there's YOT. And if I click on YOT, favorite food, raw meat, got it. All right, so we have the ability to add new data. Now, let's actually get into user defaults and set it up so that it remembers previously entered information. Okay, and let's print out that previously entered information on the home page. So we're going to continue on this method with user defaults. Now user defaults, the nice thing about user defaults is that it's a small little mini storage. It's really quick, really easy, good for saving like volume level or like this application here, previously entered information, right? It's perfectly good for that, so the user doesn't have to keep re-entering their information over and over again. So let's add another method under add new person. So I'll say func remember entered data. All right. Now, if I want to get access to user defaults, it's also a singleton object. So I'm going to say let defaults equal user defaults dot standard. All right. Now let's save name, email, and food. So I'll say defaults dot set. It's one common method. I'll say self.name and give it a key. So kind of like databases. So we'll say give it a key. So key value pair. So we'll say for key. And this for key will be just last name. All right. Now I'll do defaults dot set self dot email for key last email. All right. And then defaults dot set self.food for key last food. All right. Now, the most important thing out of using user defaults is this line, defaults.synchronize. This flushes the data to user defaults. All right. So you've just created a very simple, really quick piece of storage on your app. Nice for just saving quick little bits of data. Don't put mission critical data in here because it can be hacked, right? Even though Apple probably wouldn't admit it, but users can get to it easily. So you gotta be very careful what you store in user defaults. All right. So we have here, so synchronize is probably the most important line out of all of this because it actually flushes the data to user defaults. Now let's call this. Actually, I call this at the end of add new person. I'm just going to say remember entered data. Just say it right there. So now add new person will also flush to user defaults. So now let's just hit start. Let's go to click here to add new data. Let's add another character. So I'm going to add Walla at projectmkd.com. His favorite food will be berries. All right, and we'll hit submit. All right. Now, nothing will really happen because we flushed it to our user defaults. We need to figure out how to retrieve this user default stuff. And we're going to push this data onto the home page. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to contentview.swift. And under, just before body, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to say state var name, which is of type string, equals user defaults dot standard dot string with a lowercase s for key and then last name. All right. Let's put in a double question mark in case there's nothing there by saying no name saved. All right. And let's just double check no errors. Nope. Build succeeded. So we're good. We'll do the same thing for the next two lines of code. So state var email, which extends string, equals user defaults dot standard dot string with lowercase s for key last email. You want to be careful about the spelling of your keys here because it's case sensitive, and if you have a mismatch, it will probably default to what we're about to put in, which is no email saved. All right, so you want to double check that spelling for key. And then finally state var food, which is a string, equals user defaults dot standard dot string for key last food. double question mark that. No food saved. All right. Now let's add some text boxes or text labels. Put it just above my core data tutorial, just below it, that is. We'll say text name : /name. Give it some dot padding of 50. Text email /email dot padding of 50. Text food /food and a dot padding of 50. All right, let's give this a run. And there we go, voila. Voila, projectmkd.com, food's buried. So in our last iteration, we ran it. We didn't see any output. We didn't see any results, but because we were hoping it was actually being saved to user defaults, and it was. And we're seeing the results here. All right, one thing I'll point out though with what we've set up here, so that you may run into some issues here, is that now I'm going to go to click here to add new data, and I'm going to say Yina at projectmkd.com, and Yina might like raw meat as well. Let's say just raw chicken, just to be different. All right, we'll hit submit, and we see submitting here, and I'll hit back, and you'll still see voila. All right, we didn't set it up to refresh. For some reason, it's not refreshing properly here, and I'll leave it to you guys to explore and see how you might fix this. But if you want to verify it's there, just hit stop and run it again. All right, you see Yina's there. So it works. It's just not refreshing on the home page. So for you guys, in case you get stuck here, you're like, why isn't it updating here? Hit stop and then start again, and you should be okay. All right, so we're able to add, we're able to retrieve, we're able to do an alert to pop up some new to pop up the food. Let's return back to list entries view and finish things off for today with some gestures and delete. So we're going to set up the ability to delete when you swipe one of the cells. Okay, now let's talk about the gestures for a bit. We have here in our cell, we have on tap gesture. That's basically a click event. That's what it is. There's also, since I'm here, .on long press gesture. All right. So this is when you press and hold. I'm not gonna do delete for this. I want to stick to the drag to delete. So I'm just gonna put a print statement to say long press deleting. Right. It's not gonna delete, but just to show you that, yeah, we could be deleting here. Okay, so I go to my click to see more data. So if I click on monkey, we see favorite food bananas. By press and hold on voila, there's your long press deleting message. Okay, so that's for long press. Now let's add in our drag. All right, so we're going to continue on. There's a generic .gesture. All right, and we're going to hit enter, and inside of it we'll just add multiple lines for our round brackets here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to instantiate a drag gesture. Okay, now drag gesture has a couple of methods like on changed, right, and on ended. I'm going to use on ended for this case. All right, on ended, I'm not going to use the method style here, but instead on ended, we'll open and close some curlies, and we'll do like a completion handler here, amount in, and we'll do a print. Actually, I want to, just for readability sake, I'm going to put this there, just so it looks consistent with my other lines of code to date. So we'll say print drag delete, right? And I'm going to make a method called remove entry. And let's let's leave it here for now. Let's actually create that remove entry method. All right, that remove entry method will go here. I got too many blank lines there, so should clean that up. So I'll put the method here. I'm going to say func remove entry. All right. Now, all I have to do is, because we already have context, context is our, it's right here. This gives us access to core data, the core data database. So I don't have to instantiate anything. I don't have to do anything else. It's here. It's right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say context.delete for person. I'll have to just pass in the current person that I'm dealing with. So this same person, right? It's here. Now that's good, but I need to flush it. So I need to say try context.save. All right, now this should delete it. Now I can call it inside my drag gesture by saying self.remove entry. All right. Since we're at it, before we get into, before we run this to test, let's add another gesture, right? The magnification gesture. And I'm going to put that right here. So I'm going to say .gesture again. A couple of blank lines there. Let's say magnification gesture. All right, open the round brackets and say .ended. Not use that. There we go. Same idea again. So amount in. I'm just going to do a print statement. Say print magnify delete. Just a print statement. All right. Now let's give this a run. So click here to see data. Click on Donkey. We know that that works. Press and hold on monkey. I can see long press deleting. Now let's try magnification. Now to do, now it's very challenging in the simulator to do the pinch and zoom type gestures. So you saw the two circles there, right? And then it gets kind of, well, it did a drag delete for both, which was not what I was aiming for. So we know delete works, right? All right. That's the idea. Once you can, but it has to be over a cell. That's the challenge here, which I am failing at miserably. All right. I needed to be up there. All right. But play around with it. You will get that print statement if you can get your mouse to mouse over the right place. It's actually Control Option. All right, to do that. Okay, so this is our tutorial on core data. We've learned how to create a core data database, how to link it with our app, how to retrieve data from our database, how to save data into our database, and how to add, how to delete. And then we got into user defaults. So it's not core data, it's a separate topic. It's just simple, small storage for you to save and retrieve small bits of data. And then finally, we ended off with some gestures. So the tap gesture, the long press gesture, drag gesture, and we tried the magnification gesture, but you have to click it properly to do that. All right, so that's it for today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. And until then, I'll see you in the next tutorial video.